Hey everyone, it's the holiday season, and if you're like me, you've got a little bit of extra time up your sleeve to do some simming, so I decided to put together a short list of some of my favorite approaches that I found over the past few months that I thought you might enjoy as well. These approaches aren't in the landing challenges section, at least they weren't at the time that I recorded the video, and you can pretty much fly them with any airplane that you want, but I really recommend something a little bit faster like a turboprop just to make it a little bit more challenging. I'll have links to all of the relevant approach charts in the show notes, so make sure to check it out if you're interested in these approaches. Alright, let's get straight to the list. I'm starting off the list a little bit off the beaten path, and I discovered this one while watching Sam Chewy's aviation channel, and that's the visual approach into Skardu in northern Pakistan. You can only fly this one in VFR conditions because you're zigzagging through the valley all the way to Skardu, and you obviously need to be able to see where you're going to not slam into the side of the mountain. But you can fly this with anything up to an A320, and it's kind of crazy to think about it that there is actual A320 service to this airport in the real world. I flew it with the Grand Caravan, as you can see, and I'd recommend something similar with a decent high altitude performance, either a turboprop, a bizjet, or a very small airliner. Luckily though, I found a document online that describes how to fly the approach with a few different diagrams, where to turn and when to turn, what altitude to be at, when to start your descent, and a little bit more info. So I'm going to link to that one in the show notes if you want to try this approach as well. You barely need the flight plan anyways, because once you get to that first waypoint, all you do is fly through the valley until it opens up onto Lake Kachura, and then the airport's going to be just beyond that. It's pretty much a straight drop down to the runway, but you need a pretty aggressive descent rate if you're trying to make a straight-in approach. Overall though, the approach is quite fun, from finding the first waypoint where you enter the valley, and then the steep descent down to the runway as well. It definitely puts it up there in my list of favorites. The next one is a little bit closer to home, and that's the Expressway Visual to runway 31 at LaGuardia in New York City. If you're flying into the New York City area, there's no more fun approach than this one in my opinion. It starts out as an ILS approach to runway 4, and you stay on the glide slope right up until you come up against the Long Island Expressway, at which point you're going to hang a right and follow the expressway around, and it's going to bring you right to runway 31. This approach is a little bit tough on the graphics card, especially if you have a medium range PC like I have with a GTX 1660, but as you can see, the frames are pretty good, although I did have to do some tweaking to my settings. As you're following the expressway, you're going to see a bunch of cool landmarks as well. So you're going to be coming up on Flushing Meadows, where you've got the Unisphere as well as the National Tennis Center, and then just beyond that you've got Shea Stadium as well, and then just beyond that you're going to see the runway. The two main challenges for this approach are staying on the right glide path as you're following the Long Island Expressway and turning out on final at just the right time so that you're aligned with the runway. But when you time it just right and you just roll out perfectly, you're going to see it feels really good. Another similar approach to this one in the New York City area is the Stadium Visual to runway 29 at Newark Airport. I personally prefer the Expressway Visual just because you've got Manhattan just off to your left at all times, but that other one is a lot of fun too, so you might want to check it out as well. We're going to get back to the video here in just a second, but I do want to remind you to hit the like button if you haven't already, and consider subscribing as well. I publish a new video every 2 weeks with tips, tricks, and tutorials for Microsoft Flight Simulator, and your support helps to keep the channel growing. Next, we're heading off to Switzerland to fly the visual approach into St.Moritz. The airport is fairly isolated in the valley between all of the different mountains in the area, but because of that, it has a very special weather climate, and it's pretty easy to land here no matter what time of year you're thinking of doing it. You can either start your flight off as an IFR flight and then switch to VFR as you enter the valley, or you could just do a VFR flight from any nearby airport, just going through all of the different valleys until you come up on St. Moritz. The tight valley makes for some really difficult maneuvering, and if the wind is blowing in the wrong direction and you have to turn around, you really have to make a really tight turn at a fairly slow airspeed, so you have to really watch yourself. There's a lot of documentation online on how to fly this approach. In the real world, you have to have a special qualification to land here. I've linked to them in the show notes if you're interested. It covers how to fly the approach, the special weather of this airport, as well as reviewing the different implications of slow flight and how you have to be careful when you're turning around in the valley. You're going to want to keep all of that in mind as you're coming into land here because it really is very tight quarters. We're back in North America for the next one, and that's the river visual to runway 19 at Reagan National in Washington, D.C. Although there are no mountains here, you still have to stay within a very tight corridor over the river as you're going towards the airport. The entire area to the east of the airplane is restricted airspace because we've got all of the Washington, D.C. buildings, so you have to make sure to stay right over the river. And because of that, as you're descending off to the left-hand side, you're going to have all sorts of cool landmarks appear. So you're going to see the Washington Monument, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, and even in the distance, depending on the weather, you should even be able to spot the Capitol building as well. The chart for this approach gives you suggested altitudes based on your distance from the airport, and I really suggest that you follow them because once you get to the bridge, you're going to have to be at a pretty low altitude to turn straight onto a very short final towards the runway. You're probably starting to notice a trend in the approaches that I picked. I really like having that turn at the last second towards the runway while descending. It just gives me an incredible sense of satisfaction when I time it just perfectly. Alright, the number one position is the Queenstown Airport, and I know what you're thinking, this one actually is in the landing challenges. And while that technically is true, the approach that I'm recommending is radically different from the simple straight-in approach that you get in the landing challenges, and that's the VOR DME B approach that you can use to fly to either runway. There are lots of things to deal with on this approach on top of the mountainous terrain and the weather. You're going to be flying two different VOR radials, a DME arc, and then you're going to fly what amounts to a circle to land to get to either runway depending on the wind conditions. You can't load this approach in the G1000 directly. You have to fly it old school with VOR navigation skills, and if you want to make it even harder for yourself, throw in some really bad weather and try and fly it with a round gauge airplane instead, and you're gonna see it is pretty tough. I've linked to the chart with all the details on how to fly all the different segments of this approach, and if you need a refresher on how to do certain things like VOR navigation or a circle to land, I've got videos for that, and you can check out my instrument flying series for it. And that's gonna wrap up my short list of my favorite approaches to fly in Flight Sim. Let me know in the comments how you like these ones, and if you have any to recommend me, please drop them in too. And as a reminder, if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to get more Microsoft Flight Sim content. In the meantime, I'll be going back to plane spotting and planning my next video.